Well, hello friends now, and welcome to the Pyrate Round. And this be episode 4. And upon this episode, as tradition there in the Pyrate Round, we're going to start our episode off with a sip of rum. And this rum be here for all friends who aren't here today, wish they were here, and friends who are long gone and absent, and who we think of much in our hearts.
The rum from the Crystal Skull.
The rum from the Crystal Skull.
Tis a good rum.
Hopefully
we won't be drinking too much rum. Because, well, you can never drink too much rum. But if you drink too much rum, you might be forgetting what you're trying to say.
Absent friends, I see.
Absent friends and friends yet to come and friends yet to be met.
Alright, now.
So, Captain, I thought we'd talk a little bit about ships that we might find in the Caribbean. In parts of the ship. Now, as you can see on our fine table here, we've got some fine samples of ships. Now, these ships, they come from some friends of ours in a company called Firelock Games. They do a great, fantastic pirate game called Blood and Plunder, and they will soon be releasing another one. They've just finished it in Kickstarter, and it may still be in early pledge, so you might be able to get a hold of it if you seek it. And it'd be called Oak and Iron. It'd be smaller ships, but fantastic company, some great crew, Mike and Alex from Firelock. But anyway, we've got a couple of ships here with some of the British English crew, not British English crew. We don't have too many pirates. We've got 2 pirates on one ship. But anyway, some of the ships we've got here, Captain. The smaller one over here, we've got what's called a bark. And over there on the other side we have another bark, but it's got a little bit different front end of the sail. Now you'll be noticing that the sail is not to be on these ships because we just haven't had time to be sewing sails for our ships.
Well, it be in the winter time now, and us taking time during the winter to sew sails on our ships, and we haven't quite got around to it yet, but we will.
We've been busy drinking too much rum.
All right.
So, what do you know much about the barks and the ships that might be sailing? I know a wee bit.
Well, I know a bit about the bark, and there's also the barkentine, which is even a different ship now. A small coastal trading vessel, very useful in shallow waters, and quite common. Often mistaken for most other ships when someone says, "Oh no, look at the sails on the horizon. Why, it's got to be a giant schooner or a this and that." Well, no, it's typically you see it just a trading bark coming across, and it's got lots of peoples on it and lots of goods, and traveling along the coast, making stops at all the little ports, bringing goods to people thereabouts. So that's what I know about the barks.
That's been pretty good knowledge. Now these 2 barks here, they've got what they call bow chasers. Those are the 2 smaller cannons that you might be seeing up here on the front. Those be small cannons that don't have the range, don't have the firepower that you might be used for sweeping the decks of your enemies. That you'll be going after, firing a quick round at them to warn them. And it's got 2 smaller cannons. Probably most likely they were 6 or maybe 9 pounders at most. They weren't very big. These ships didn't have a huge amount of cargo space, but they had enough for to do what they needed to do. And pirates were quite happy to even have a small ship like this to start off with, because it could sail pretty much anywhere into the small bays and hidden areas on the coasts in the Caribbean. So one reason we talk a little bit about the ships today is in this here month of March. March was a very specific, had something quite incredible happen in March of the 1400s. It was the development of a second mast in a ship. Now before then, ships typically only had one mast. Your cogs and things like that, which were small coastal ships, they might go across the English Channel, but they weren't very seaworthy, as to say. So the second mast allowed for a ship to be sailing further and faster, and it made it actually a greater target for the pirates, because then they knew that ship could be going carrying more trade and such.
Well, as far as I know then, having a second mast then added to your ship now allows it to do quite a bit of maneuvering with the wind and against the wind. And an anecdote from history you might not know, but one that's quite interesting is way back in 1066 when William the Conqueror was waiting in France, waiting to get across the English Channel over to England to stake his claim to the throne. The winds were blowing straight out to the north, and William sat there upon the beach cursing and kicking rocks and beating his dogs and slapping his servants about, so angry that he couldn't sail north, because he couldn't sail against the wind, you see. For all his ships were old Norse ships perhaps, or old cogs. They had probably cogs because they had to carry horses with them, and they couldn't sail against the wind. And so he had to wait and wait and wait until the wind finally changed and blew from the south, and then he was able to launch his attack upon England. Now, the addition of a second mast would allow many of his ships to, although it would have taken quite a bit of time for them to tack along the way, the sheerness of the wind back and forth, and allow them to travel against it. And that's a great bit of technology, because then it allowed ships to travel all the way around the world despite contrary winds and contrary tides.
It's good information to know. So, as you see, we've got the ship here, and this being the bark, this is actually a brigantine, which is a little bit bigger of a ship. You can see it has bigger masts. It's got a different kind of sail layout. You have your main mast, which would be here, and then you've got your what would be your
well, that's your foremast.
Your foremast.
Yeah.
And then you had your bowsprit, which is your front end part of your ship there. And you see both of them have it. This little ship here, the bark, it only had two what you might call topsail type square sail that would be on it. You didn't have any of your angled sails, which you refer to as maybe your jib and your topsail. And then on this ship here, you've got an angular back sail. Now this would actually allow you to move maybe a little bit better in the wind. This one might give you a little bit more speed, but not quite as good. This one giving you a little bit more speed and catching the wind a little bit more. This one, your sails would only go so far. You couldn't turn it too far to either side and not catch the wind. Whereas this one, you have a sail back here that's be angled that helps you out a little bit more.
Now, I see you've got these boats here now, and now these boats, they be used with Blood and Plunder for Firelock games, you say?
That be.
Now, there's quite a few little gentlemen inside.
And two ladies.
And two ladies. And those be the little pirate figures that we put inside there. And now this is an interesting segue then for us to take into pirate games.
Yes, it would be.
So in Firelock games now, they've got the figurines, and you'd use them as tabletop and figures for strategies and pirate attacks, and use ship-to-ship combat or person-to-person combat. But you know, with a group of these smaller ships, now those would be ship-to-ship, wouldn't they?
Aye, they would be, Captain. So, in the game Blood and Plunder, you've got different factions. Now, when Blood and Plunder Firelock games first came out with their game, they had they did what they call a Kickstarter, which is a new way, I guess, of getting funding to start their companies and to sell their products. And they started off with the English and the what they call the unaligned or the pirate, and the French and the Spanish, and each one is a 28 millimeter sailor that some of them you can use in either force, be it you might have what the English call the Forlorn Hope, and the French have something, I can't quite think of the name of it right now, but they have a different name for them. And then you have Sea Dogs, which are great for sailing. You have your Maracinos. You have Spanish have Lanceros, and even some native archers that they might have used with that they might have converted to their religion and gotten them to fight for them. And each force usually is played with about 100 points that you build upon your what kind of forces you might want in your force, and you play on a table about the size, probably about our ship table here, and you use like a playing deck of cards. Now they actually have a card that is designed for each one of the factions that is quite nicely done in artwork, in a little bit different art, but that gives you your initiative and tells you what you'll be doing, and then you'll be rolling some bone dice that tells you if you'll be hitting the other guy or missing. And you play what they call strike points. Strike points are if you lose too many of your men, you get a point against you, and whoever has the most strike points against him at the end of the game is the loser. And recently, Firelock Games just did another Kickstarter, which introduced the Dutch forces, the official pirate forces, European forces, and the native forces. Now the native forces are your ErikB. You can even use Iroquois or some other Native Americans that would have been along the eastern coast of the Americas, or in the Caribbean, or in the South and Central Americas, that you might be using them. From my understanding from those who've been playing it, the Native Americans be quite feisty on the land, but not worth beans when it comes to being on the water. They don't have the range, and they don't have the kick and the hiding abilities that they would have on land. And then they also released some new ships. We have a sloop over there on the far corner, as you can see. A sloop was a very common pirate ship that was also, it's more of an upgrade from the bark, and it had the jibs, which are your more triangle-y shaped sails, and allowed for great speed and shallower draft up into the bays, and a good crew, good amount of firepower for a starting pirate. A lot of pirates would have possibly started off with either a bark or a sloop, and then hopefully captured themselves what would be the brigantine here, and eventually hoping they would catch up to something like a frigate. Now a frigate would be a quite formidable ship, and then of course you've got your galleon. Your galleon be your treasure ship that the Spanish would have been carrying all their treasures and goods upon, and but would have been quite a feisty fight to go up against, and where a pirate crew might have 50 to 150 in their crew, a Spanish ship probably wouldn't have that many, but they were very well armed and very well trained. And as a pirate, you may not be wanting to fight, you may be wanting to scare, and a galleon, well, she'd be kind of a hard ship to be scaring.
Well, now, you know, the idea is that when pirates engaging in combat, the whole idea is to take the ship without too much damage so that you can sell it. And another idea is that you want to take all booty intact. And perhaps you want to take hostages aboard that you can ransom out later. And so the idea, of course, is to scare your prey into submission so that you don't have to fight that often. Now, involved in a fight, pirates, you know, essentially were fighting for their lives, because none of them wanted to face the news. But they would much rather fight and intimidate and get the fight over quickly rather than a prolonged fight, so that they wouldn't damage their own ship or kill too many of their comrades. And what have you got there,
Now
Scarlet Raven?
now you might be thinking it's a galleon. Now this is not a galleon. This is what would be called a fruit. This was designed in
Dutch ship, did.
built right, correct, by the Dutch. Now you can see if you're looking at the lines of this ship, it's kind of fat on the outside. Now this allowed it to carry a lot of cargo. She's quite slow, but she's quite a formidable ship. She would have 3 masts coming up here, and then another one that came up here. Your smaller. Let me look and see. I'm not that familiar with the ship, but possibly your bowsprit, your forecastle is what this is, and then you've got your different layers of your ship here, as you can see. You may not be able to see in the video, but this ship here has got quite a few gun ports. We've got, it looks like to be 6 gun ports, and then we've got a couple of bow chasers that would be fitting on here. Lots of good space. You can see the slope of the ship compared to what another ship might have, that might be more angled and down on your hull.
Well, you know, the flutes were quite fat-bellied for their carrying a great deal of cargo. Designed for the Dutch East India Company, so they could travel all the way around the world carrying cargo holds full of goodies, spices and such from here and there, and survive the trip, which might often take as long as a year.
Now, as you be talking about a galleon, I'll be pulling up a galleon here.
Oh, look at that thing.
This is a monster
like
of a ship.
Floating castle.
You can see it's got the fatter bellies too, so it could carry a lot of cargo on it. This is quite a beautiful ship, and if you were a pirate with a galleon,
got a back porch that goes all the way around.
So you could do your sunbathing, Captain.
Yeah.
You could go diving off into the ocean if you wanted. This is quite a nice ship, quite a beautiful ship. It would be quite formidable and scary to go up against a ship like this if you were in a bark. You might be smarter if you had your main ship and possibly your consorts, 1 or 2 other ships that be with you, that you'd be wanting to take on this beastie of a ship, because her crew would be pretty well trained. Now the Spanish weren't the most stalwart. That's the word I'd be thinking about. They could scare quite easily, but enough of them on their ship and the great firepower and the well training. Well, you would not want to be fighting one of them.
No, I wouldn't.
And then I'll bring you up another ship here. This is what they call a tartana. A tartana, as you can see, it's about the size of a small sloop. It does not have as many guns. You've got 2 ports here. You've got lots of bow chasers on this here ship. This would be typically used in the Mediterranean, but the Spanish and the French use these quite heavily in Caribbean, which it was good for coastal trading and patrolling. So patrolling for the pirates and natives that might be have gone a little rogue, you might say. But this is a tartana. You've got your rudder back here. Now a lot of people would be seeing on a ship that's got a big steering wheel. Now the steering wheel actually was a later development. Beforehand they had a tiller in the back that they'd be using. But a lot of times you'd be seeing in movies, you'd be seeing these ships in the times of the pirates with a big steering wheel. And that was actually a pretty new invention by the time the pirates had come around.
Oh, it's true.
In the 1700s, it was more of a later development, and it was a quite efficient development because it allowed easier steering and better steering. But before then, especially on these smaller ships like your bark and your sloop and your brig, you would have a tiller on the back that you'd be steering with.
And now that big tiller on some of these larger ships would be called a whipstaff. And the whipstaff man would be inside his own little cabin, and he could not see where he was going, and was thus dependent totally upon the sailing officer to give him directions. So everywhere that the sailing officer told the sailor on the whipstaff would turn himself port to starboard, he couldn't see where he was turning, and he was totally dependent upon the sailing officer to give him direction.
And Chris at the ready. Hold your breath, lads.
Now, Captain Scarlet Raven, now, you were talking about barnacles under the boat.
Right, so we had a little bit of an interruption there. We had a sail come across and we had to investigate. Nothing to worry. But yes, your ships would have barnacles that built up on the bottom, and ships later on would put copper plating on the bottom, which would help stop barnacles and wormwoods.
Teredo worms,
Teredo
what they're called.
Is the actual term, right? It
Yes.
would bore into your wood and cause it to get spongy and slow and rotten, and that would be a very bad thing. So
Very bad.
they would take their ship and they would get to a beach and they would turn it kind of on its edge as much as they could, and then they would scrape the barnacles, the little sea creatures off, and patch anything up to that way their ship would be faster and much improved when it came to trying to catch our prize or trying to escape from the enemy.
That's true.
You had your bowsprit here. Some of them had the little triangle sail. This one has a square sail. You had your foremast and your foretopmast up here. This is the foretopmast and this is your foremast. And this ship here would have two sails that were your square riggings. This would spin slightly to either side to allow the catching of the wind and the sailing. You had your main topsail here. This would have a square. And then you had your mainsail. As you can see, it's kind of an odd shape here. This way, this would swing to either side and allow you to catch the wind and push you along. Up here, you'd probably have pennants and your flags. Now, many a pirate might be sailing underneath a false flag, whether it be in England or Dutch or Spanish or French. And then once they got close to the prize, then they'd be raising their colours. And that way they send off a signal to the enemy ship that they better be surrendering or bad things will be happening to them.
Showing your true colours, as we say. You don't do it till the very end.
And down here would be on a ship that might have an angle here on your foresail. You might have something called the foreboom. And back here you've got your rudder. Now your rudder, like I was saying, doesn't always be driven with the steering wheel like you see on Pirates of the Caribbean and some of the other more modern ships, but we leave that up to Hollywood instead of having your tiller rudder there in the back of the ship. So anyway, these ships be from Firelock Games. We talk a little bit about the ships, talk a little bit about parts of ships, and I would highly recommend, if you like a good Pirates game, you'll be looking into Firelock Games Blood and Plunder and Oak and Iron, which will be releasing soon, and we'll be really excited for that one because it's small ships that we might play on this here table and have quite good actions. We might even be able to do the whole Blackbeard being captured. Fun things to replicate there. So anyway,
fun for everyone else, but not for Blackbeard.
No, it's a great way to be losing your head. Anyway,
Yar har.
Yar har, and smooth sailing, and we hope you enjoyed this here episode.
Good day to you.